Hello and welcome to part 16 of the Jeep tutorial series. This will most likely be the last part. But in this part we're going to go ahead and transfer all those materials that we made in the Blender internal, the Blender render, and we're going to swap those into the cycles render. But before we do that, there's something that I noticed. I don't know if you guys had this problem or not, but upon rendering out the different angles of the Jeep, this one looks, well, you can kind of see some mess here on the seat. And then also here on the tires now. I'm not sure what was causing that. So I looked at the texture map, and if we come down here and take a look at all the tires, it does not look the way I painted it. For some reason, when I saved it out, there must have been a bug in Blender or something like that that messed up all of our smooth bump maps. So it was like that on the tire, and it was like that on the seats, as you can see, and also. I think the Jeep normals themselves were pretty well okay for the mud on the Jeep body, but then also on the gas can it was all messed up. So I updated my Blender. I was using 2.70, I think, and I updated to 2.72b. So if you're having the same issues with the normal maps or the bump maps getting that weird jaggedy edge, go ahead and upgrade, and then you can either do it again or another easy way, which would be more accurate actually, if we just go into Photoshop and open up, for example, you can see I already did it here, but let's just open up the gas can texture. And this is the actual texture map, the color texture map. So I want to take all this mud that we painted onto there and make that bumpy. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go Adjustments, and I'm going to Desaturate. And we'll just turn this into a black and white image. Now I want that mud to be coming up out of the surface, which would be gray, so I'm going to swap the colors here. I'm going to go Image, Adjustments, Invert, and now everything that's light will be raised up, whereas everything that's black will be pushed down. So I want to change the contrast a bit so we get a little bit more variation there. So I'll just do like so. Now in Photoshop, if you just save out, it'll save a fairly large file size, but you can save for you can optimize it, which will make things load a little faster. You can go Alt-Shift-Control-S or Save for Web and Devices, and that'll optimize. We'll bring the window up here. I don't think I can make this smaller, but it brings up this window here, Save for Web and Devices, and you can change the quality of this optimized image that you want to do. I'm going to go ahead and leave it at 60% because that's usually pretty decent quality. I'm going to go ahead and save that, and right now we have gas can bump. You can see I already made this earlier, a little bit more texture on there, or contrast, but I'm going to go ahead and name it, if I'm bringing this up, Gas Can Bump, we'll name it Gas Can Bump 2. So we'll save that, okay? And let's go ahead and, I'm not going to save the original because that's the color one that we want. We don't want to accidentally overwrite that. So let's see, we did that with the gas can. Let's go ahead and do it on the tires. I did pretty much the exact same thing, just brought in the color image, and that way we have the mud and everything going to be exactly on top of exactly on top of its location there. So it's actually more accurate to do it this way as far as the actual locations of the bump versus the color of the bump, the mud. So same thing, we go Adjustments, Desaturate, and like I said before, I have CS3 Photoshop, so if you have a different or later version, your menu might be in different order, might be shuffled around a little bit, but okay, so that's not too bad. Let's go ahead and adjust the contrast on here. Contrast. I like to use the legacy because it gives you a little bit more fast results. So we'll go about like so. Go ahead and save this. Alt-Control-Shift-S. Bring up our Save for Web and Devices. Come over here, save. And this is on the tire, so it's going to be down to the bottom. And wheel tire bump. Already did it again. Just testing out. We'll name this one 2. Go ahead and save. And then X that out, and no, we don't want to save the original because that's the color one. And last but not least, the seats. So we'll do the exact same thing, just bring the seats in. And we're probably going to have to do the same thing we did on the gas can because the actual seat tone is most likely, once we desaturate it, oops, oh, you could have done it that way as well, but I'll just go desaturate. The mud is darker, so it's going to sink down into the surface rather than come up above. So I'm going to go Adjustments, Invert, and then we'll do the contrast, Use Legacy. Okay, then we'll Control-Shift-Alt-S and save for web, save, and this will be seat. Bring this up here. Seats texture, or seats bump, I guess, and then since I already did it earlier playing with it, seats bump 2. So we'll just save that. Okay, exit out. Nope. Okay, so now we're pretty well ready to switch over to cycles. So the quick, easy way to do that, obviously, is just to click up here and go Cycles Render. Now you can kind of see what you're doing as you're doing it if you change your viewport shading to rendered. And it'll slow things down a little bit because it has to, cycles is more of a, it's the lights and the shadows and everything are based more in the real world where they bounce off of things and just act more physics based. So it has to calculate that every time you change your scene. But setting up the materials, it's going to be pretty easy since we have it set up. We're basically just going to be modifying the materials that we already created in Blender internal. So I'm going to start with the Jeep body, so make sure we grab that. You can see what you're selecting over here or right here, Jeep item. So right now, plane 06, looks like that's the floor. I'm going to go ahead and rename this as I go, floor. And then that's going to be the seats, I believe. No. Seats, there you go. See that? Okay, seats. All right. Okay, so let's just go back to the Jeep body. Go ahead and select the Jeep body material. And you can see there's a material there, but since we're in cycles, we have to set it up differently. We have to use the node system. So we click on Use Nodes, and the default surface that it adds on there is Diffuse BSDF. Not sure exactly what BSDF stands for, but that's the one we need to use. So we'll come over here, and what was originally, let me collapse this window here, the Properties tab. We don't really need it open right now. And we don't really need the Tool tab open there either, so... let me turn on my screencast keys. I thought I had those turned on, but I guess they turned off. But side note, by the way, if you like to do tutorials yourself and you want to use the screencast keys, they took it out of the default 2.72 version of Blender, so you'll have to find that Python file in an earlier version and copy that into your 2.72 add-ons folder. So, anyways, okay, so now we have to jump into the node editor. So pop over there. And let's collapse this panel a little bit. And we can zoom in over here so we can see what we're doing a little bit better. Okay, so now, tell you what, let's just go ahead and collapse that panel altogether. I don't think I need it at all right now. Right now we have Diffuse BSDF and the material final output. So right now it's set to just a white color going to the surface. So if we wanted to make that different, we could say green or whatever. But I'm just going to go ahead and leave it white. It doesn't really matter at this point because we're going to add in our texture maps. So let's go add, and we're going to say texture, image texture. So we'll load that in here, bring it over here, and hook up the output color for the image texture to the input color of the diffuse BSDF using the noodles. Those are called noodles. So now we can open our textures, our Jeep. Let's go to thumbnail view. Scroll down here. And one other thing I did in the meantime between part 15 and part 16 now is I took the bright green Jeep texture that we made and darkened it a little bit, and it made it look a little bit more realistic, more real world, because the olive drab is not lime drab. It's a darker, dull green rather than that bright neon green almost that we were using. So I darkened it up a little bit, so we'll go ahead and use that one. So we'll open that up. Okay, and you can see it automatically maps that as it should. Now, it's olive drab, so it's not going to be very shiny, but I would like it to have a tiny bit of a sheen to it. So I'm going to add another shader. So right now we have the diffuse shader, which means it's just a flat color. There's no shininess to it at all. It's just the texture map and nothing else. So I'm going to add another shader. I'm going to say this one's going to be glossy BSDF. So we'll add that up here. And then now to mix them together, we'll have to add a mix shader. So we'll add that up there. Kind of rearrange these. Now we'll add the BSDF to the bottom one. I mean the diffuse to the bottom one and the glossy to the top one. And then add the output to the material surface. You can see it disappears there. So now it's way too shiny. It's reflecting all that white background too much. So we have to adjust the shader percentage, the mix percentage. Right now it's a half and half. It's a half glossy, half diffuse. So what I want to do is run that almost all the way up. If I run it all the way to 1.0, it's just only the diffuse. but we want a little bit of glossiness. So I'm going to say 95%. I'm going to go 0.95. Type that in there. Now you can see we have a tiny bit of glossiness here on the corners and edges. And if we were to change the background color, if we go to our world settings here and change that instead of white, if we make it like a black, you can see it kind of reflects that in the Jeep. It kind of reflects the surrounding environment. So, like I said, Cycles is based more on the real world with real world reflections and light bounces and things like that. So, okay, so we got our texture for our main Jeep set, but we want to go ahead and throw that mud, bumps, those mud bumps on there. So, I'm going to basically do the same thing. Go to my image texture. I'm going to just Shift D and drag that over, or you can Control C, Control V, same thing, just duplicates it. And I'm going to go ahead and open up the Jeep bump, Jeep normals right there. Since those were fine when we saved them out, I didn't have to take them into Photoshop and redo them, so they won't have the number after them. So this one, you have to set, instead of a color image, you have to say right there, color, you say non-color data right there. So you turn that to non-color data, and then you run the image texture color output to the displacement material output. So boom. And you can see we now have a few bumps there. They're kind of hard to see in this window. If I run that down a little bit, you can see it. If we zoom in, maybe it'll be a little more visible, especially right in here, maybe on the bumper. There's a little bit there, but if you really want to give it a, you really want it to stand out, you can add in a converter. And is it converter? No, it's going to be under color. There we go. And say brightness, contrast, bright contrast. Run that in there between the image texture and the displacement, and then you can set the contrast up a little bit. I like to go to about 1 to really make it stand out. And you can see we now have some visible bumpiness there in the mud area. So right in here and there. Okay, so good to go. Let's go ahead and do the same thing on the tires and wheels. So since we have the material for the tire and wheels set on all 5 of these tires, all we have to do is change all the settings just once. So I'm going to copy out this whole mess that we made, this whole noodly complication here that we did for the body. I'm just going to copy everything, hit A couple of times to select it all, and then go Control C. Then I'm going to select one of the tires, and you have to tell it to use the nodes. Actually, make sure the tire itself is selected. Yes, okay. Then you say use nodes on that one. Make sure you're in the material tab. I was over in the world settings there. Make sure you're in the material tab, say use nodes, and it'll go ahead and start creating the Cycles version of the material here. But I don't want to have to set everything up again, so everything's selected now. I'm just going to delete it, and I'm going to go Control V, and it's going to paste in all the settings that we did for the body. But obviously they're not correct because those are the wrong texture maps. So all we have to do is just come in here to these 2 different image inputs that we added in, and we'll say wheel tire texture 2, I believe, but the mud, yes. So we'll say that one, open that, and now it's on there, but now it has the wrong bump map. So we'll go ahead and open up the wheel tire bump 2, go and open that one, and there we go. So now we have some nice mud. You can see in here on the rim especially some of that bumpiness for the mud, real thick mud. Okay, so now we'll jump on and do the seats. Same thing, go ahead and make sure you're in the materials tab, use the nodes. I'm going to go ahead, and I still have all the materials copied from the body, so I'm just going to delete out the settings there and Control V, paste those again. And we're going to do the exact same thing we did on the tires. Just swap out the seats texture, open that, and then open the seats bump 2, open that. Okay, so the seats are all set. You can see it has some thick mud on there. Might be a little, seats probably wouldn't be as caked, the mud wouldn't be as caked on as they are here, but we'll just leave it as is. Now, last but not least, the gas can. And go ahead and use the nodes on there. delete the defaults, paste in the setup already, and then make sure we change the texture map. So gas can texture, open. Okay, and then go ahead and open in gas can bump 2, open that. Okay, so all the actual texture maps are good to go. We can rotate around our scene and zoom in here and see that everything's, well, I said that. We need to go ahead and do the gauges and things too. These are the bane of my existence. These take so long to do. But we'll just do one, and then we can just copy things over, just like we did on the others. So make sure you select one of the gauges. We got speedometer gauge. Glass, I'm going to go ahead and change that one. That'll copy everything across all 5 of those. Go ahead and say use nodes. And this time we're not going to paste the settings from the body of the Jeep. We're just going to go ahead and create some new ones. So instead of diffuse, you can do it 2 different ways. You can go to add shader and say glass and then hook that up, or you can just come over here under the material settings and just change that from diffuse BSDF to where's it at, glass, right there top. And you see it automatically makes it transparent. Now if we set the roughness up a little bit, it'll kind of fog it a little. So if I make it maybe 0.05, it'll fog it just a little bit. Okay, so that's good for that. Speedometer gauge, go ahead and grab that, say use nodes, and we're going to go ahead and add in an image texture there. Go ahead and hook that up, and go ahead and open up the speedometer textures. Gauge, I think it was 01, gauge 01, because that was the first one I did. I didn't name it speedometer like I named the other ones corresponding to what they were. Gauge 01 texture, there we go. Go and open that up, and as soon as it refreshes over here, you'll be able to see a little bit. It's kind of dark in here, so I'll tell you what, I'm going to go to the world settings. Let's make that white again so we get that nice bright ambient color coming in. So now you can kind of see, there we go, the numbers and the gauges and everything. So I'm going to go ahead and just go through here and set up the rest of these guys. Make sure we're on the amps gauge now. So add in texture, image texture. Go and hook that up. Open textures, gauge, amps texture. Open that. And that should do that nicely. So tell you what, just to save a little bit of time, let's select everything here, Control C, and we'll just kind of do like we did on the tires and everything, and just delete the default and paste in. Then all we have to do is, which one was that? Temperature gauge. So go ahead and open up the gauge temp texture. Okay. And then this guy here, the fuel gauge. Go ahead and select the right material, use gauges, or excuse me, use nodes, delete the defaults, paste in the setup already, open the fuel texture, there we go, and then the final oil gauge. So use nodes, delete the defaults, Control V, open, oops, hit the F button on accident, open up oil texture, there we go. Okay, so those are all set up. Now the only remaining materials that we really need to mess with are the headlights and the turn signals and then the windshield. So let's start with the headlights. Go ahead and grab that. And we have 3 different materials on here. We have the headlights, the glass for the headlights, and then the black rubber that goes around it, and then the chrome inside of it. So let's set the headlights, the glass of it, to use nodes, and we'll just go ahead and do it over here. And we'll say glass, where is it at? The top. Glass BSDF, there we go. And let's go ahead and give it a little bit of roughness, 0.05 again, just like we did on the gauges inside. Black rubber we don't really need to mess with. You can say use nodes if you like, and then just leave it diffuse BSDF, that's fine. And then chrome, this one will be easy. We'll say use nodes and say diffuse. Instead of diffuse, we'll go to scroll up to glossy BSDF. So it's kind of like when we added the slight sheen to the body, except this one will have, you know, a perfect sheen. So it's going to be reflecting the whole background. It'll be like chrome. So we also need to tell the color to be all the way white. So you can kind of see those that looks a little bit more like more realistic headlights there. Okay, so for the turn signals, I go ahead and use nodes. This one will do a mixture of the glass and the glossy, because these don't. There's no hole for these, so we don't have the chrome in there. So what we're going to do is turn this diffuse to, if I scroll up here, to glass. There we go. And go ahead and set the roughness there to about 0.2 this time. And then go ahead and come over here. We're going to add in a mix shader. Go ahead and drop that on there. It automatically hooks it up. And then we'll go ahead and add in a glossy shader. And go ahead and hook that one up. And this time set the color to almost yellow. But this one's going to be more the sheen to it than the actual color. Okay. So you can kind of see that looks a little more like the, maybe not yellowish, more of the amber, orangey yellow color. And maybe set it all the way up to 1. It's only going to show the top one. The order of these noodles, the way they're hooked up, is if you're at 100, excuse me, if you're at 100%, it's showing only the bottom. If you're at 0%, it's showing only the top. So about 0.5 is a good mixture between the two, but I would like it to be a little more transparent, a little more of that orangey color, so I'm going to bump that down to 0.35. And I think that'll probably be okay. So now, to save a little bit of time, I'm going to select all this stuff here, Control C, and then we'll come around to our tail lights. Go ahead and select that. Brake lights, and go ahead and say Use Nodes. Go ahead and delete out the defaults, Control V, paste in the new ones, and go ahead and change these to red. And that one to red. And then that's pretty much all we'll need to do on that. Okay, so we got our headlights and taillights all set up. So the Jeep's materials are pretty well done here. Excuse me, done here in Cycles. Well, I say that. We still got to do the windshield, but that's going to be easy. So we'll say windshield, and we'll just say use nodes, and it'll be glass BSDF. Now it's reflecting. You can see it's a little bit weird. If we come at a certain angle, everything behind it disappears, and that's the index of refraction. So if we had like a glass, well, a monkey head or a diamond or something that's going to have, it's going to warp the background through it. That's going to have that refraction. We would need a high index of that, but we don't. It's basically just a thin piece of glass. It's not going to be any refraction at all. So let's just bump that up, all the way down to, well, we could say 0 most likely, or maybe 0.1. Or we'll just say 1.0. Just give it an even number. It looks like it's nice and transparent then. So that's good to go. Maybe give it a tiny bit of roughness. Maybe it has some dust or dirt on it. So we'll say 0.01 or maybe 0.05. Just to kind of blur things inside there. Okay, so that's good to go. I know time's running out, but I want this one to be the very last, set and piece in this tutorial set. So I got a couple things I want to do. Right now, you could go ahead and render this if we look through our camera and hit F12. It'll render it out. Let me go ahead and pause recording so we don't have to sit here and wait for it to render out. So we'll be back shortly. Okay, so that rendered out relatively quickly, but you can see it looks a little bit better than the internal, because the bumps look a little better, and the reflections and things like that just look a little more natural. The headlights are my favorite because they look more like real headlights than just the subtle, transparent whatevers we had on the Blender internal. But this looks nice and all, but it's not a very good presentation. I mean, it's just the Jeep there by itself. So let's fancy it up a little bit. Let's close this out. Let's go to our object mode, or solid view mode, and let's set this background to be what's called an endless plane in photography. And what that means is it's a floor that rounds up into a wall. So what we need to do, first thing, is tab into edit mode of our there we go. Tab in edit mode of our ground plane here, and hit W. We're going to subdivide. And tell you what, hit the T button so we can open up our transform, our toolbox over here. And I'm going to say number of cuts. Let's just bump that up to, I'll say 4. Then we'll go to our side view, go to our vertex select, and let's just start grabbing these last 2 and just raise those up and just get that rounded up. And then I'm going to go ahead and extrude those so we have a nice rounded background there. So I'm going to select all that, maybe move it back a little, maybe scale it up just a bit, drag it back up to the floor. There we go. And we need to go ahead and turn on a subdivision surface. I'll tab out of edit mode so we have a nice rounded background there. We need to make sure it's set to smooth shading. Okay, so now if we go to our material settings, we can say use nodes, and instead of shadows only, we'll say floor. Okay, and I'd like this one to kind of the bright white seems a little off-putting to me, so I'm just going to make this more of a darkish gray. So if we come through our camera view, you can see that edge of that ground floor, but we don't want that. Let's grab that. I'm going to hit the R button to rotate and rotate it on the Z-axis until it fills that window completely. Okay, so now if we go back to our rendered preview, we can see it fills the window back there nicely. Even if it was white, it would be okay. We don't have that. We don't have to worry about the corners of that ground plane coming through anywhere or anything like that. So I'm just going to go ahead and darken that, maybe just a bit of gray there. Then if we set our world settings to be more of a dark color, we can get a more natural look here. So let's grab our lamp. If I go to our outliner up here, point light, let's turn that to it's set to a sun. I guess it was originally a point light, so we'll just go ahead and rename that sun. And let's set the size. I don't know if the size, if I say use nodes, there we go. Turn the strength to, let's make it 2. Give it a little bit more brightness. And if we go to our solid view, we can kind of see which direction it's pointing. Raise that up. And let's just give it a little bit more angle, maybe over like so. And let's see what that looks like through the rendered view. Okay, so that looks pretty fancy. So I like it. So that's how to get your light set up in a nice endless ground plane. Maybe we can change that to, let's see if we make it black, if it'll look good at all. No, I mean, it looks alright. It kind of depends on what style you're going for. If we go ahead and make it back white, that's not too bad. Makes the headlights look a little better when it's brighter. But one other thing, you can go ahead and call this done if you like. Go ahead and render out one final one here. I'll go and pause recording so we can get that rendered and actually tell you what, before we do that, I'm going to escape that out. A couple of tips and tricks here to make your renders faster. Cycles usually takes a lot longer to render than the internal. That's kind of why I don't use it that much, because I'm not a very patient man. But you can change some of the settings so that it will render a little faster. Sampling, if we look at the rendered, you can see a lot of graininess in here, and that's because Cycles kind of just puts it together. You know, it samples each little piece, so you can see it in here too, the little graininess there in the shadow. If we were to set the samples up here in the preview to say maybe 15, it would recalculate a few more and smooth those that grain out. The higher your samples, the better your image is going to look. So we like to keep the preview lower just so we can get an idea what it's going to look like when we render. But we want the render to be higher. So you can, as much as you have patience for, you can set that up as high as you want. I usually try to shoot for at least 100. So I'm going to put 100 in there. And now we'll come to our light paths. And this is kind of where it helps speed things up. Transparency, we're going to set that, cut it in half, set it to 4. Light bounces, I'm going to set that to, I'm just going to cut basically all this in half. Unless it's an odd number, then I'll just estimate up. Diffuse, glossy, 6, and then we'll just leave that one. And that should help things go a little faster. Another thing we can do, performance. The size of the tiles that it does individually, it renders tile by tile instead of the whole thing at once. Or you can set it to have bigger tiles like that, or you can say progressive refine. And instead of rendering each tile until it is finished, refine the whole image progressively. It renders slower, but you can, if you get up to say 90 samples and it looks fine, you can go ahead and cancel out the rest of those 10 instead of having to have each square render 100 samples of each one. But I'll typically keep the tile, so I'm going to go ahead and say I'm going to double this one, 128. So there we go. So now, and maybe set the start resolution to 32. Okay, so this should render a little bit faster than it would have had we not changed these settings. I'm going to go ahead and save this. All right, Jeep 16, save. Okay, so I'm going to hit render, then I'll pause recording so you don't have to sit here and watch it for, I don't know how long it's going to take. Since it's 100 samples, it will take a little while, but I'll be right back. Okay, so that finished rendering in about a little over almost 2.5 minutes, 2 minutes 25 seconds. So that's not too bad a time for rendering that. You can still see quite a bit of grain there in the shadows, so you can increase your sample size in the render settings, maybe make it 200 or 300, maybe however much you have time for. Just keep in mind, if you're making a movie, a video clip, it's going to take that 2 minutes and 25 seconds for each frame. So that's kind of why I don't like to use the cycles render when I'm making movies. When I'm just doing still image like this, it's fine because it gives you a much better looking image. But for videos, I don't have the patience for 2.5 minutes for every frame. My computer, I use it, while things are rendering, so it really eats up my resources. So if I had a spare computer to render on, it wouldn't be so bad. But in any case, that's my personal preference. Okay, so if we look back at our render here, one trick you can get around that, set up the samples, or go ahead and make your background a darker color, and that'll help make some of that not as visible. But I know I said part 16 was going to be the end, but there's one more thing I'd like to show you just to fancy our scene up here, and I'll show you that. I'll go ahead and make a part 17, I guess. So that'll be it for part 16, and in part 17 we'll go make our scene look a little bit better. So thanks for watching. I'll see you in the final part, 17.